And yes, I'm absolutely excited to, not only because it's the last paper for today, but because introducing my colleague from the High School of Economics Research University in Moscow, Ganzha, who is PhD, and she is Associate Professor at the Faculty of Humanities School of Philosophy and Cultural Studies. And she teaches courses such as sociology of fashion, theory and history of art, history and methods of cultural sciences, musical romanticism, and also history of sound and voice. And Anna will talk on signs of suspicion and suspicious signs, the circulation of fashion in the context of socio-political polarization.
Thank you. Actually, my report is conditioned by situations that happened with me a year ago. This is inspired by that. With my daughter, it was just an ordinary area in Moscow region, and my daughter was wearing a side-thrown dress and hyacinth color socks, and my daughter and I saw that a police officer was looking at us very suspiciously, looking at the girl's body, my daughter's body. And you know, even though this is our surrounding, you know, it turned out that this was a vivid effect. I was really shocked to my core that the child could be subject to such a detailed glance simply because it was not fully yellow and not blue, and you know, but I assessed the situation. And I realized that the child is accompanied by someone else who is wearing a different combination of colors, black and more purple-like. The situation kept repeating. Why? Because one of the brands that actually remained in the Russian retail is Benetton, with strips. And I'm actually wearing all of the things which I bought some time ago. And because of the strips, I have to justify myself, or I have to excuse myself, or I have to pretend that I am a local. I try to do the mimicry, and just because I am mostly walking, it should be said that my daughter and I have found out some routes that allow us to not go to homophobic places and, you know, sort of avoid them. So this was the report, hence the report. I call it Suspicious Sign and Signs of Suspicion, how fashion circulates given social and political polarization. Not that I'm saying this is a diagnosis that I'm given to the society in terms of polarization, but it is clear that there are different strata, and fashion is in this Russian space. It is not circulating as a united global phenomenon, but rather there are very specific exchanges, sign exchanges, and all of this was quite rapid, the changes, just in front of our eyes. So these were very rapid changes which had never been there in this space before. So based on the usual authors, Zimmelbart, Batillard, Benjamin, Stephen Hall. So from the point of view of cultural studies, they address this theory, and also from the angle of sociology, I am actually going to address this topic, how these signs circulate, and do they circulate at all? Because, you know, in this way or another, the entire 20th century in Russia, and during this 20th century, there was a free street space and free area that allowed to look at each other, glance at each other, stare at each other, given the legal or non-formal, formal limits, restrictions, you name it, the self-expression. So all of this indicates this is a unique situation where the factory of the designer idea of the industry goes on functioning, but as if it's no longer alive. It's just automatically going on, following up the trends that were there beforehand. So these are undesirable, the combinations of signs, colors, forms, undesirable and unsafe for those who are wearing this. So this is actually not a subject to be discussed. This is a very specific topic. This can always be avoided. But on the other hand, we constantly face these obstacles. But there are different groups, population groups that face them differently. My students, for instance, face this more often than me. And for them, maybe, this has even a more significant character. And on the other hand, such prohibitions, such bans on combinations, the repressions of certain signs, there is a story connected with this. And during different times, there have been different excesses. Yes, this has been observed, and actually silent books have been written about this topic. On the other hand, it should be mentioned that this post-Soviet society, strange as it may sound, it was not very different from the Western one, because this society was not because it was the bearer of Western values, but because it had specificities related to the regime of consumerism. In fact, the consumeristic values were still there. There were some limitations and certain restrictions, but they were not mass. There were the stylish groups, hippies, and then there was the party members who were saying that, this is undesirable or too eccentric to be considered one of our own. So all of this was the first such case where this free circulation, the free development was facing the serious boundaries and obstacles. In Soviet publicity, that is to say the public figures, they were also helping the circulation. They did not hinder the hunt for something fashionable, a fashionable piece of clothing back then. Thus, we deal with certain changes, and I would like to enumerate them with your permission. These changes have led to newer types of identity and to the need to recode this science. Of course, this process is also difficult to control because the public space has changed, and in this public space, we have seen those who didn't want to be part of this, people who were forced to be there, people who were given some words for this, that is to say, they were given the right to speak. And back in the Soviet time, post-Soviet times, these female identities that were expressed through fashionable signs, they were first, they were a bit leftish, but then they were more rather liberal. And for the first time during this last year, this public space got richer with female types, more conservative type. And this too is something new and something quite surprising. But not to bore you, what should I do? What should I click on? This button? Okay. And at the same time, there is a usual set of colors, signs, pieces of clothes that have had their connotation and denotation. So black, for instance, a universal culture, it has its set of symbols, but during the recent year, we have seen
an addition in the number, an increase in the number of public funerals. That is to say, what is practiced is, this long live sessions. Interestingly, the deaths of post-Soviet designers, Vyacheslav Zaitsev and Valery Yudashkin, they were live. The funerals were live, and for many hours there were photo sessions available for the public. There was a live transmission. And here too, we start seeing black in a completely different light. We see that the black column became something else. It can be linked with aristocracy, with a great male foregoing of color. It's a situation when someone is more or less invisible or not so visible, but because this changes create blind spots for those who wear them, then black too is changing its significance and meaning. This is a famous excerpt from the funeral of Eduard Zakalaev, quite famous. People of different ideas came here. They were all wearing black. They're waiting for the ceremony, and I think this is a crematorium, if I'm not mistaken, and it can be seen that the polarization is also affecting the black column. Just a second. The previous patterns connected with a lengthy story, long story, they support this tradition of masculinity. They highlight the masculinity, and they will also change. This too becomes a blind spot, which is like normalized or normalization, normal clothes. I would even dare say that whatever is happening is a creation of a zone of normalization. That is to say, clothes are no longer a means of self-expression because they're becoming dangerous means, but they talk very loudly. But to stop the functioning of the sign, what is selected is a sense of norm, something that has lost its genealogical link with the brand itself. By the way, look at Oleg Gazmanov. Certain people guess that these are costly brands. It's a famous Russian singer, but he is still positioning himself as normal, so-called normal. And I assume that this is just everyday clothes. And a very interesting type has occurred. This occurred a long time ago, but it reached its peak of publicity. This is a so-called moral entrepreneurs. That is to say, conservative society members, and they are for strict filtering of prohibitions. That is to say, they are there to fight for the values. These are just examples. So there is this branch of the Russian style. Of course, these are image makers who are doing this. So this is what is being used, I believe. But still, this is again positioned as normal, the so-called normal, and as a glamorous type. Again, a blind spot. That is to say, this is just normal clothes. Normal. Yes, it's feminine. But everything is normal. That's why it's feminine. And this is also the continuation of this moral entrepreneurship, but a more radical form of that. This is a party allied representative from the party that is the dominant one in Russia, called the fair Russia. This is a lady who is also trying to support conservative values, taking quite strict and consistent measures and actions. So for them, the blind spots are, so these are connected with the 60s, with the 70s, with the 90s. This can be retro. This, you know, all of this is in the public space, presented in the public space. This is also normality. So this is just normal, beautiful, a normal, beautiful woman. And what makes, the more normal she is, the more open she is. And if she's open, she feels confident. This is really radically contradicting the conservative or affirmations and rules which restore the imaginary femininity of people. And a certain question which is related with the fluctuating people and centrists. That is to say, part of the social agents try to have the common sense and represent common sense. It's interesting how what's the Westminster codes of supporting this may be. This looks quite eccentric, if you ask me. Alexander Rosenbaum, as an example, he tries to balance and he tries to constantly think about what is happening. So what is happening? Which is why, just like many other people, he tries to speak, he tries to reflect, he tries to keep his common sense, but also this is a mourning process, from mourning, but still a bit bohemian, I would say. And this also supports the identity related with common sense. That is to say, if you can keep your common sense, whatever happens, then you can keep it at all times. I'm like this. People often, very often say, I am like this, so what? I'm a person like that. Please accept me for who I am. And what is very interesting is this type of identity, that is to say, being a monk, in a way, a priest, but also living in the world at large. So this is that radical approach, I would say, because the social agents use such so-called neutral city-like urban forms connected with this lay monasticism. This is our clothes that do the mimicry, that do not let you read them, interpret them fully, as if these clothes are abstract. These clothes are as if that they are interpreted as very ordinary, but there is a genealogical link with certain styles, but this is something that is not subject to interpretation. And here too we see asceticism, ascetic respectability or respect. That is to say, something that should not signify itself. It shows itself as respectability. Respectability that is not too vivid, and respectability that is not very radical. So interestingly, there are quite extreme views which often covers themselves with a certain abstract form, as if this is something very restricted, very useful, urban. And there is also very interesting types of intellectual people, so-called intellectual people. That is to say, when we're talking about the depressed layers that have been on sleeping, but this intelligence that feels moral supremacy and can claim to know the truth, highlights Kashmir, link, queer hairstyle, and something like that. This is Artemy Lebedev, very famous, a patriot, and once again, a very interesting type of identity to be highlighted, related to common sense. But I call this class consciousness blind spots. Why? Because we see that there is a class conflict as well. But just as in any bourgeois society, of course, there is mimicry, mimicking something. And the clothes are of great help here. That is to say, creativity is a very widespread strategy, type of identity, which also represents common sense. And who can point at what? Yes, that's who I am. That's what I am. That's take me for who I am. A very important and widespread tendency, trend. And these people, often can say things like, I don't care. No one can tell me what to do. They can even provoke someone for a certain reaction because the questions that are asked are interesting. For instance, what do you think? They can ask a question, and the Western world, is it fully enslaved, or what is that? No, nothing will enslave us. That's who I am. Look, I have blue hair and I'm walking freely. And a specific type of category. I am a bit afraid of this category, I should say. But this is interesting. This is a work correspondence. Grunge, that is to say, people who are related to the militarism, military style, and this is like ultra-pedagogism. That is to say, this is trying to be a moral authority, but in a very radical way. And just an example, black. Black is used a lot, but I would say, how is it used? Actually, these are by the, let's say, depressed, surpassed layers, really like a refusal to play all these symbolic games, or game of symbols, and actually desire to say that fashion, self-expression is no longer appropriate. We remain who we were. We are unchanged, unperturbed, and I think this is such a case of black can also be used as, lack of force, as a pause, and we can say much about Shaman. He's a singer, but I will not. I will restrain myself. I will just say that sometimes he gets into this refusal, as if, he's hopeless. He doesn't know, we don't know what to wear, so we're wearing black because we don't know. And once again, this is an apotheosis of all of this, is a moral sermon on behalf of normalcy. That is to say, calling for common sense, not to listen to anyone. Yeah, this is what it is. This is leather, but it's not important. And maybe it's completely new, or maybe it's old. Again, not so important. This does not match the topic of our conference. And why not? All of us are men and women. Women can be horribly beautiful, terrifically elegant. They can believe in something, they can hope for something, talk about something, and no one can tell them not to do it. So I will be concluding, and by this, that fashion, and in this case, it's both a sign, it's interpreted and it's not interpreted, and and is ascribed, and it is circulating, not circulating. That is to say, fashion is really, like a language, as Barth would have said. And in this case, if we talk about other topics, this also becomes a blind spot zone, where he starts to talk on his behalf. So it starts to talk on its behalf something else. And as a container of meaning, where everything can be taken, mixed, taken off, everything from this container, but still culture speaks on its behalf, language speaks on its behalf, and fashion science also speaks on its behalf. That's it on my behalf. Thank you.